When 4-year-old twins are abandoned on the unforgiving Kansas prairie, their whispered belief that they were too bad to love threatens to define their entire lives. But a gruff rancher and his loyal dog are about to show them that sometimes the family you need finds you when you least expect it. Can two broken children discover that their worth was never determined by who left them, but by who chooses to stay? Thunder rolled across the Kansas sky like God's own wagon wheels, shaking the wooden boards beneath 4-year-old Caleb's bare feet. Rain pounded the roof of Henderson's general store, where he and his twin sister Molly huddled like frightened rabbits. It was the autumn of 1879, and the world felt as cold and empty as their growling bellies. "Mama's coming back," Molly whispered, her blonde hair sticking to her wet cheeks. "She promised." Caleb squeezed her tiny hand, but his green eyes watched the muddy street, where no familiar figure appeared. 3 days had passed since their mother kissed their foreheads and walked into the morning mist. 3 days of waiting. 3 days of gnawing hunger that made his stomach feel like a twisted rope. The store's back door creaked open, spilling yellow lamplight across the puddles. Mrs. Brennan's sharp face appeared, her lips pressed tight as a closed purse. Behind her stood a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest, Sheriff Donovan, whose boots always made scary sounds on wooden floors. "Still here, are they?" The sheriff's voice boomed louder than the thunder. "Can't have beggars cluttering up decent folks' businesses." Caleb's heart hammered like a woodpecker against his ribs. He pulled Molly closer, feeling how small and fragile she was, like a baby bird fallen from its nest. The rain soaked through their thin clothes, making them shiver until their teeth chattered like dancing bones. "Their mama ran off," Mrs. Brennan said, crossing her arms. "Left them like unwanted kittens. The church lady's been talking maybe the orphanage in Topeka would take them." The word orphanage hit Caleb like a slap. He'd heard whispers about that place, children lined up in rows, working from sunrise to sunset, forgotten by everyone who'd ever loved them. His small fingers found the wooden horse their papa had carved before the sickness took him away. The toy felt warm and smooth, worn down by worried hands. "We ain't orphans," he said, his voice barely louder than a mouse squeak. "Mama's just getting medicine. She'll be back." But even as the words left his mouth, they tasted like lies. Deep in his chest, a terrible thought grew like a weed. Maybe they were bad children. Maybe that's why Mama left. Maybe they deserved to be alone. Sheriff Donovan stepped closer, his shadow falling over them like a dark cloud. "Boy, your mama ain't coming back. Sooner you learn that, the better." Molly started crying then, soft hiccuping sobs that broke Caleb's heart into a million pieces. The rain kept falling, washing away their hope drop by drop. And somewhere in the distance, a train whistle called out like a lonesome ghost, carrying dreams to places they'd never see. The morning sun painted the Kansas prairie gold as butter, but Caleb felt nothing but cold fear in his belly. He and Molly had spent the night shivering behind Miller's blacksmith shop, listening to the clang of hammers and the hiss of hot metal meeting water. Now, as the town of Millfield woke up around them, danger walked on 2 legs wearing a black dress. "There they are." Mrs. Adelaide Foster's voice cut through the morning air like a knife through bread. She marched down Main Street with the sheriff beside her, her face stern as winter stone. Behind them trailed 3 other grown-ups, all wearing the same look that made Caleb's skin crawl, the look that said children were problems to be solved. "Come now, little ones." "Mrs." Foster called out sweetly, but her smile reminded Caleb of a cat watching mice. "I'm from the Children's Aid Society. We're here to help you." Molly's small hand gripped Caleb's so tight it hurt. "I don't want help," she whispered. "I want Mama." The grown-ups moved closer, forming a circle like wolves around sheep. Mr. Henderson from the general store was there, counting coins in his palm. The new school teacher, Miss Jenny, wrung her hands and wouldn't meet their eyes. Even Pastor Williams nodded along, though he looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "These children need proper care, Mrs. Foster announced to the gathering crowd. "The state orphanage provides meals, education, and moral guidance, They'll learn useful trades and become productive citizens. But Caleb heard different words hidden beneath her speech. Cages, loneliness, and forgetting. He'd seen the haunted look in the eyes of children who came back from such places empty as broken windows, their spirits crushed like flowers under boot heels. "We can take care of ourselves," he said, stepping in front of Molly like a shield. His voice shook, but his feet stayed planted firm. The adults laughed, not mean laughter, but the kind that said children didn't know anything about the real world. That laughter hurt worse than being hungry, worse than being cold, worse than Mama's empty promises. "Foolish child," Mrs. Foster said, reaching out with hands that looked like bird claws. "You're barely more than babies. You can't survive alone." That's when Caleb made a choice that changed everything. He grabbed Molly's hand and shouted the only word that mattered: "Run!" They bolted through the crowd like rabbits escaping a trap, their bare feet slapping against the dusty ground. Behind them, grown-up voices rose in anger and alarm, but the twins kept running. They ran past the last houses, past the last fences, into the endless grassland, where the sky touched the earth and freedom felt possible. The prairie stretched before them like a green ocean, beautiful and dangerous and wild. Somewhere in that vastness, they would find their answer or lose themselves trying. Thunder crashed overhead like angry giants stomping across the sky. 4-year-old Caleb dragged his sister Molly through the tall grass, their bare feet slipping on wet earth. Rain poured down so hard they could barely see past their noses. Lightning lit up the dark world for quick moments, showing them nothing but endless grass in every direction. "I'm scared," Molly cried, her small hand gripping Caleb so tight it hurt. Her blonde hair stuck to her face like wet string. "Where are we going?" Caleb didn't know. All he knew was they had to keep moving away from town, away from the mean sheriff and the scary lady who wanted to take them to that awful place. His stomach felt empty and twisted, like a rope someone kept pulling tighter and tighter. The rain started falling even harder. Soon they found a big tree with thick branches that kept some of the water off them. They huddled together under it, shivering like baby birds fallen from their nest. The wooden horse their papa had made felt slippery in Caleb's wet pocket. "Mama's never coming back, is she?" Molly whispered into the darkness. Before Caleb could answer, a new sound mixed with the storm. It wasn't thunder or rain or wind, it sounded like cows, big animals making low, sad noises somewhere nearby. Then came another sound that made both children freeze. Hoofbeats splashing through puddles, getting closer and closer. A man's voice called out through the storm, but they couldn't understand the words. The hoofbeats stopped. Caleb pulled Molly deeper under the tree, his heart beating so fast he thought it might jump right out of his chest. "Easy, Ranger," the voice said. "Much closer now. Something's got you interested." A golden dog appeared first, water dripping from its fur. It looked at the children with kind brown eyes, and wagged its tail slowly, like it was asking permission to be friends. Behind the dog came the biggest man Caleb had ever seen, leading a huge black horse. The man had gray hair and wore a long coat that looked heavy with rain. His boots made squishing sounds in the mud. When lightning flashed again, Caleb could see the man's face. It looked serious but not mean, like someone who spent lots of time thinking about important things. "Well, I'll be," the man said quietly. "Ranger, looks like you found something more valuable than lost cattle." He took off his hat, letting rain fall on his head. Water ran down his face like tiny rivers. "You children lost?" Molly pressed closer to Caleb. Neither of them answered. They'd learned not to trust grown-ups too quickly. Too many had looked at them like they were broken things that needed fixing or throwing away. But this man didn't look at them that way. He looked at them the same way he looked at his dog. Like they mattered. Like they belonged somewhere. Even if that somewhere wasn't clear yet. "Name's Ezra," he said, crouching down so he wasn't so tall and scary. "This here's Ranger. We've got a warm place not too far from here. You're welcome to it if you want." The barn smelled like hay and horses, and something else Caleb couldn't name. Something that felt like safety. For 2 weeks now, he and Molly had been living in the cozy loft, above where Ezra kept his animals. Every morning, the man would climb the ladder with warm milk and thick slices of bread that made their empty bellies stop hurting. But today felt different. Dangerous. Caleb woke up to angry voices coming from outside. Through the small window, he could see 3 men on horses talking to Ezra near the house. One of them wore a shiny star on his chest, the sheriff from town. Caleb's whole body went cold. "They found us," he whispered, shaking Molly awake. She sat up fast, her eyes wide and scared. "Do we have to go to the bad place now?" Before Caleb could answer, they heard boots on the ladder. But it wasn't the sheriff climbing up, it was Ezra, moving slow and careful. His face looked tired and worried. "Children," he said quietly, "we need to talk." They sat together on the soft hay. Ranger climbed up too, which always made Molly giggle because the dog was too big for the ladder, but tried anyway. Today, she didn't laugh. "Some folks in town think you'd be better off somewhere else," Ezra said, choosing his words like someone picking apples, very carefully. "They say I'm not the right kind of person to take care of children." "Are you going to send us away?" Molly asked. Her voice so small, it was almost lost in the barn sounds. Ezra looked at both of them for a long time. His gray eyes reminded Caleb of storm clouds, but the good kind that brought needed rain instead of scary lightning. "What do you think? Do you want to stay here?" "Yes," both children said at the same time. "Even if it means working hard? Helping with chores? Learning to take care of animals?" Caleb nodded so hard his neck hurt. "We're good workers. We can prove it." "I don't need proof," Ezra said. "I just need to know you want to be here. Because wanting to belong somewhere is the first step to actually belonging." Through the window, they could hear the sheriff's voice getting louder. Something about rules and proper places for children. Ezra stood up and brushed hay from his pants. "You two stay right here. Ranger, you stay with them." The dog's tail thumped against the hay. "I'm going to have a conversation with those men about what makes a proper home." As Ezra climbed back down the ladder, Caleb felt something new growing in his chest. It wasn't fear or sadness or that empty, hungry feeling. It was something warm and strong, like a tiny fire that couldn't be blown out. Maybe, just maybe, they really could belong somewhere after all. But first, Ezra had to convince 3 angry men that 2 little children were worth keeping. A horse thundered toward the ranch house, kicking up clouds of red dust that swirled like angry spirits in the morning air. Caleb dropped his bucket of chicken feed and grabbed Molly's hand as they watched Sheriff Donovan ride up with a stranger, a tall woman in a black dress who looked like she'd never smiled in her entire life. "Children, get behind the barn," Ezra called out, but his voice sounded different. Worried, scared even. Ranger growled low in his throat, the fur on his back standing straight up like tiny soldiers ready for battle. The woman climbed down from her horse with movements sharp as broken glass. Her eyes swept over the ranch like she was counting everything that was wrong with it. When she spoke, her voice cut through the prairie wind like a knife through butter. "Mr. Covington, I am Mrs. Adelaide Foster from the Kansas Children's Aid Society. We've received reports about 2 vagrant children living on your property without proper supervision." From their hiding spot, Molly squeezed Caleb's hand so tight it hurt. He could feel her shaking like a leaf in a storm. They'd heard grown-ups use that word before vagrant. It meant unwanted. It meant trouble. "These children aren't vagrants," Ezra said, stepping forward with his hands held steady at his sides. "They're part of my household now. They work, they learn, they belong here." Mrs. Foster pulled out a leather folder thick with papers. "The state of Kansas requires proper education and Christian guidance for orphaned minors. A bachelor living alone on an isolated ranch cannot provide adequate moral development for impressionable young minds." Sheriff Donovan shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now, Adelaide, these kids seem well cared for. Maybe we could work something out." "The law is the law, Sheriff." Her voice snapped like a whip. "These children will be transported to the Topeka Home for Foundlings, where they can receive proper instruction in useful trades and moral behavior. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The Topeka home, he'd heard whispers about that place from other children in town. Kids who went there came back different, quiet, broken, if they came back at all. Ranger suddenly barked and bounded toward their hiding place. The adults turned to look as the dog led Caleb and Molly out into the open. There was no point in hiding anymore. "We don't want to go," Molly said, her small voice barely louder than the wind. "This is our home now." Mrs. Foster looked down at them with eyes cold as winter stones. "Children, you don't understand what's best for you. The home will teach you discipline, proper skills, and how to become productive members of society instead of burdens on charitable strangers." "They're not burdens," Ezra said quietly, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "They saved 23 head of cattle in the last blizzard. They work harder than most grown men I know." "Sentiment, Mr. Covington. What these children need is structure, education, and separation from this primitive environment." She gestured at the ranch like it was something dirty. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Caleb felt the moment balance on the edge of a knife. Everything they'd built here, everything they'd found, could disappear with one word from this woman in black. "Now hold on just a minute." The new voice came from behind them, strong and sure as thunder rolling across the prairie. Everyone turned to see Doc Harrison climbing down from his wagon, his medical bag in one hand, and a stern expression on his weathered face. Mrs. Foster straightened her spine. "Doctor, this is official state business, and I'm an official witness to what happened here 3 months ago." Doc Harrison walked forward with the confidence of a man who delivered half the babies in the county and patched up the other half when they eventually got into trouble. "These children nearly died of fever before Ezra took them in. I treated them myself." Sheriff Donovan perked up. "Doc, what exactly did you see?" "I saw 2 kids burning up with sickness, abandoned and alone. And I saw this man," he pointed at Ezra, "nurse them back to health with more patience and care than I've seen from most parents." Doc Harrison set down his bag and crossed his arms. "Mrs. Foster, have you actually observed these children's living conditions?" The woman in black lifted her chin. "I don't need to observe what the law clearly states." "Then observe this." Doc Harrison walked over to Caleb and gently took his arm, rolling up his sleeve. Where once there had been nothing but skin and bones, now strong muscle showed beneath healthy skin. "This child has gained 15 pounds since Ezra took him in. His sisters gained 12. Molly stepped closer to Caleb, and he could feel some of her fear melting away. Doc Harrison had always been kind to them, always spoken to them like they mattered. "Furthermore," the doctor continued, "I've tested their reading and arithmetic skills. Both children are performing above their age level. Ezra's been teaching them himself every evening after chores." Ezra looked surprised. "Doc, I never asked you to." "You didn't have to ask. Sometimes a man does what's right without being asked." Doc Harrison turned back to Mrs. Foster. "Now, the way I see it, you've got 2 choices. You can tear apart a family that's working, or you can recognize that these children have found exactly what they need." Mrs. Foster's face grew red as a sunset. "Dr. Harrison, your medical opinion doesn't override state law. These children require proper institutional care." "What they require," interrupted a new voice, "is what they already have." Pastor Williams from the town church walked up the path, his Bible tucked under his arm and his face set with quiet determination. Behind him came 3 more people Caleb recognized from town: Mr. Chen, who ran the grain store, Mrs. O'Brien, who taught at the schoolhouse, and surprisingly, even grumpy Mr. Peterson, who never seemed to like anyone. "Pastor Williams," Mrs. Foster said, clearly flustered by the growing crowd, "surely you understand the moral implications." "I understand that these children have attended every Sunday service since they arrived. They know their scriptures better than most adults in my congregation." Pastor Williams smiled at Caleb and Molly. "I also understand that charity begins with love, not institutions." Mrs. O'Brien stepped forward. "I've been teaching both children advanced lessons 3 times a week. They're bright, eager to learn, and well-behaved. Any school would be proud to have them." Mr. Peterson, who had never said a kind word to anyone, as far as Caleb knew, grumbled. "These kids helped me fix my fence after that storm. Didn't ask for nothing in return. That's more than I can say for most folks." Caleb felt something warm spreading through his chest. As he listened to these grown-ups people he'd thought barely noticed him, and Molly speaking up for them. Ranger pressed against his leg, tail wagging as if he understood that the tide was turning. Mrs. Foster looked around at the circle of faces, all watching her with expressions ranging from disapproval to outright hostility. For the first time since she'd arrived, uncertainty flickered across her features. "This is highly irregular," she said finally. "So is abandoning children who found their place," Doc Harrison replied firmly. The courthouse clock struck 10 in the morning, when Judge Patterson shuffled his papers one final time. Caleb and Molly sat on a wooden bench, their legs swinging freely above the floor, while Ezra stood behind them with his hat in his hands. The smell of old books and nervous sweat filled the air. "Mr. Covington," the judge began, peering over his spectacles, "adopting 2 children at your age is no small matter. These youngsters need schooling, proper clothes, medical care when they're sick." His voice echoed in the quiet room like thunder in a canyon. Molly grabbed Caleb's hand so tight it almost hurt. They'd been through this dance before, adults deciding their fate while they sat silent as church mice. But something felt different today. Ezra stepped forward, his boots clicking on the wooden floor. "Your Honor, I've watched these children face down a blizzard that sent grown men running for cover. They've nursed sick cattle through the night and worked from sunrise to sunset without a single complaint." His voice grew stronger with each word. "I may not know everything about raising young ones, but I know about loyalty. And these 2 have more heart than most folks twice their age." The judge studied them all carefully. Outside, a meadowlark sang its sweet song. But inside the courtroom, time seemed frozen like winter ice. Caleb could hear his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. "Children," Judge Patterson said suddenly, looking directly at them, "do you want Mr. Covington to be your papa?" The question hit like lightning. Nobody had ever asked them what they wanted before. Molly's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't sad tears. Caleb found his voice first. "Yes, sir. More than anything in the whole world. He saved us," Molly whispered. Then louder, "He makes us feel like we belong somewhere." The judge smiled, the first real smile they'd seen from him all morning. "Well then, that settles it." He picked up his big stamp and pressed it down hard on the papers. "By the power given to me by the great state of Kansas, I declare Caleb and Molly Hartley to be legally adopted by Ezra Covington. From this day forward, they shall be known as Caleb and Molly Covington." The words hung in the air like magic dust. They were a real family now, with papers to prove it. Ezra knelt down and wrapped them both in his strong arms, and for the first time since their mama left, the world felt solid under their feet. But their biggest challenge still waited outside those courthouse doors, proving to the whole town that 3 strangers could become something stronger than blood. 5 years had painted the Covington Ranch with the colors of true belonging. 9-year-old Caleb stood in the barn doorway, watching his sister teach their newest calf to drink from a bucket. Molly's patience reminded him of their papa, now gentle but determined, never giving up on anything worth saving. "Remember when we thought we were too broken for anyone to love?" Molly asked, wiping milk foam from the calf's chin. Her voice carried no sadness anymore, just wonder at how much their lives had changed. Caleb nodded, thinking about the scared little boy he used to be. That wooden horse their real papa had carved still sat on his windowsill, but now it had company, a whole family of animals that Ezra had whittled during long winter evenings. Each one told a story of belonging. The sound of wagon wheels on gravel made them both look up. Mrs. Henderson from town was coming up their drive, but she wasn't alone. 2 small children sat beside her, their clothes dirty and their eyes holding that familiar empty look. Papa, Molly called toward the house. We have visitors. Ezra emerged, pushing back his hat as he recognized the scene. Mrs. Henderson climbed down slowly, her face grave with purpose. Ezra, I hate to bother you, but these young ones have nowhere else to go. Their folks died of fever last week. The boy is 6, the girl just 4. The children huddled together like scared rabbits. Caleb's chest tightened as he remembered that feeling, being unwanted, being a burden nobody chose to carry. What are their names? Ezra asked gently, kneeling to their level. Tommy and Rose Miller, Mrs. Henderson replied. They're good children, just lost and alone. Caleb watched his papa's face and saw the same expression he'd worn that day by the creek, like he was seeing something precious that others had missed. Without thinking, Caleb walked over and knelt beside the scared boy. I know how you feel, he said softly. I used to think I was broken too. But you're not broken, you're just waiting for the right place to heal. Molly appeared with a cup of warm milk and her gentlest smile. Are you hungry? We have fresh biscuits that Papa made this morning. The little girl's eyes widened with hope. Something passed between Ezra and the twins, an understanding that needed no words. Their family had room for more love, more healing, more second chances. Well, Ezra said, straightening up with a grin, looks like this ranch just got a bit more crowded. Mrs. Henderson, I believe we've got room for 2 more Covingtons, if that's all right with you. The prairie wind carried their laughter across the grassland, where it mixed with cattle lowing and meadowlarks singing. Sometimes the best families aren't born. They're chosen, piece by piece, heart by willing heart.